If you're a frequent viewer of the Spector Creative channel, you know that I am a big fan of collecting 3 3/4 Star Wars figures. Yeah, I still collect some 6-inch Black Series, but 3 3/4 and especially Classic Trilogy is my bread and butter. I've been addicted to these guys since '95, well, actually since I was a little kid. But I've been committed since '95, since Power of the Force 2 came out, to getting every Classic Trilogy figure, and it's taken me years to build this collection. I mean, this Cantina set here took like 25 years to build. And I keep all my figures all in different bins with all of their accessories, clearly labeled, and as new versions of figures come out, figures I may have already had, but updates come out, well, I have no problem buying the updated version, especially if it's a Classic Trilogy figure. Now, a few years ago, Hasbro took a cue from Super 7 and Funko to create retro figures, figures that were recreations of the original 80s aesthetic with the black dot eyes and the limited articulation. Now, for Star Wars, this was as simple as recreating the old figures. This is actually something that isn't new to Hasbro. They've done this before. They actually did this back in 1995 when the Power of the Force 2 line first launched. Granted, this was only one single 4-pack, and the figures weren't quite recreations, more like copies of copies of copies, but hey, we all love getting our old toys. And the chance to get carded versions of figures we had as a kid, now mint again, is something that's very, very intriguing for adult collectors because it lets us recapture our childhood. Especially because the retro collection now, as I said, taking a cue from what Reaction has done in other brands, is now creating characters that never had a toy in the vintage or the retro Star Wars line, and doing it in that style, hence Snowspeeder Luke, or this was also done with Grand Moff Tarkin in the Capture the Death Star game. So it's a great way to capture that current trend of getting 5 points of articulation, minimal deco figures that look like they could have been produced in the 80s. Recently, well, not so recently, about a year or so ago, I did a video about the Retro Mandalorian collection, noting that it was not the way. I was disappointed with this. And for someone who's a huge fan of this look and Star Wars, it's in a way shocking. Why would I not like this? Well, the reason is these figures, and especially the figure of the Mandalorian himself, I felt was not embracing the correct aesthetic of the vintage line. Namely the fact that he had a vinyl cape, that thing that's wrapped around his shoulders there, coming down his back. So, back in the 80s, there were 2 types of capes that Star Wars figures came with: cloth and vinyl. And, well, to say that there's argument from fans over which is better is an understatement. But, looking at the timeline where Mandalorian takes place, meaning after Return of the Jedi, by the time Kenner got to Return of the Jedi, they weren't doing vinyl capes at all. These ended with Empire Strikes Back, Lando and Bespin Leia being 2 of the final figures to get vinyl capes. A New Hope, Episode 4, all the figures had vinyl capes. Well, sort of all the figures. And by the time we got to Return of the Jedi, cloth capes had now become the standard because, well, the line had evolved and it had been upgraded and technology had gone along, and well, it was time to take figures that once had vinyl and now give them cloth. The only figure in the entire line that actually had 2 releases was the Jawa, where the original release was the vinyl and then he was followed up by a cloth cape, but this was done just from a price-value standpoint. Kenner found that parents saw the Jawa as a smaller figure, similar to Yoda, that giving him the vinyl cape did not give a price value comparable to the other figures in the line that were taller. So the vinyl cape was removed and replaced with a cloth cape entirely to create the perception that this figure had the same price value as other figures in the line. Of course, this led to the cloth cape and vinyl cape Jawa being one of the first rare variants of the line, with people now creating fake vinyl capes or reproductions to put on their cloth cape Jawas to try to recapture that original look. But as the only figure in the entire line to have had the benefit of both a vinyl and cloth cape, the Jawa definitely stands out and is a perfect illustration of this evolution, shall we say, in the line. So yes, as we turned past Empire Strikes Back and headed towards Return of the Jedi, vinyl capes were out and sculpted capes and cloth capes were in. No one had a vinyl cape. In fact, the final figures in the line, like the Emperor and the Imperial Dignitary and Anakin Skywalker, had sculpted capes. They didn't even have cloth capes at all. So hey, even if you wanted to take that cloth cape off your Jawa, now he actually looked like a post-Return of the Jedi figure, since it was now sculpted capes, had replaced even the cloth versions with obscure characters like Prune Face benefiting from the cloth evolution of the line. Alright, so with that as a baseline, knowing that if you picked up a Return of the Jedi figure, you were not going to get a vinyl cape at all. All of the characters now had more, I guess you could say, modern capes, with the cloth aesthetic showing a better price value and increasing the perception of, well, that these figures were worth what you were shelling out. Although it is surprising that all the figures that did originally have vinyl capes, like Vader and Obi-Wan and the Tusken Raider, never got the upgrade that the Jawa did. They just continued to ship with vinyl capes all the way through Power of the Force 1. Alright, so with this as background and me blathering on about the difference between cloth capes and vinyl capes and what's the difference, why was this such a big deal when The Mandalorian came out that they had a vinyl cape, not a cloth one? Well, because, as I noted, Mandalorian takes place after Return of the Jedi, meaning at this point in the line, in the original line, all the figures had migrated to cloth capes. And this was kind of the proof in the pudding that the current team managing the line was sort of just going by spreadsheet, and they weren't really thinking about the emotional connection of these figures and how to truly recreate that feeling that these figures were from the vintage line. Now, that changed with the second Mandalorian series, and I am overjoyed with this. You'll notice that the new version of Mandalorian in his Beskar armor now sports a cloth cape instead of a vinyl one. Thank you, Hasbro. Yes, to me, this makes the Mandalorian figure feel much more like a post-Return of the Jedi toy. Because if there had been Mandalorian toys in the 80s, as if Mandalorian came out after Return of the Jedi, you would have gotten figures with cloth capes. But the real gem for me in this second wave is this Boba Fett, the new sort of post-Sarlacc Boba Fett, where he's cleaned up his armor and he's still wearing some of his Tusken Raider kind of tribe outfit underneath. I cannot tell you how much I have fallen in love with this toy. So when I was a kid, this toy was by far one of my favorites. I'm sure it was a lot of your favorites. Boba Fett was amazing. He was colorful, he had a mask so you didn't know who he was, and he had a quote-unquote non-rocket firing backpack. Well, that's exactly it. It's the backpack. Look what they did. For this new Boba Fett, they recreated the vintage Boba Fett's backpack, complete with the missile being a separate piece. It doesn't come out, but it does jiggle a little bit. Wow, the memories this brings back. This is amazing. If you look at the Mandalorian figure or Bo-Katan, they have, I guess if you will, Mandalorian-style backpacks from the show. Boba Fett, though, they didn't do that. They didn't style his backpack that way. They gave him the vintage figure's backpack. And I absolutely love this. It's the details like this that makes me love this line, and I hope it continues for so long. Things like the type of cape and the, I guess, aesthetic of the backpack and the jetpack, these kind of things show that Hasbro's really paying attention now. I love this figure, and I highly recommend it. I can't get enough of it. If you like this video, please do share it with others. I try to jump in on the comments whenever I can, and what do you think of the new retro line? Is it meeting your emotional, vintage, nostalgic needs? Let me know in the comments below.